When a homeless man is humiliated and kicked out of the theater, Keanu Reeves steps in with an unexpected twist. This act of kindness will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about celebrities. What happens next is shocking, and you won't believe how it all unfolds. A powerful reminder that one person's actions can change someone's life forever. Watch to find out what Keanu does next. It was a crisp evening in the heart of the city, and the new blockbuster movie was showing in the Grand Theater, the kind of place that promised an escape from the everyday grind. The air inside the theater was filled with the faint scent of buttered popcorn and the rustling of movie tickets. The cinema was packed with people scattered across the plush red seats, each settling in with their snacks, ready to immerse themselves in the story unfolding on the big screen. The lights dimmed, and the room fell silent except for the occasional murmur of excitement from the crowd. It was a typical night at the movies, and everything seemed set for a peaceful and enjoyable evening. However, there was one person in the back row whose presence went unnoticed by most of the patrons. A homeless man, worn down by life, dressed in tattered clothes and a faded jacket that looked like it had seen better days. His shoes were scuffed and stained, and his face carried the marks of hardship. His hands were weathered, but his eyes, though weary, held a glimmer of something deeper: hope. He sat quietly, almost invisible amidst the others. His seat, positioned in the farthest corner of the room, was away from the bustle of the more fortunate crowd. He was alone, holding a small plastic bag filled with scraps of food. Every so often, he would take a bite, savoring the little meal he had managed to scrounge together. For him, this evening was a small luxury, a rare chance to enjoy a simple pleasure. As the film began, the homeless man leaned forward slightly, his eyes glued to the screen. The sounds of the movie, the dramatic score, and the bright flashing images on the screen were a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of life outside. He wasn't causing any trouble. He was merely one of many strangers seeking a moment of escape. He was just another person in a dark room, watching the world unfold before him. But not everyone saw him the same way. The theater's security guard, a tall man with a rigid posture, was making his rounds. He'd done this job for years, walking the aisles, making sure everything ran smoothly, and ensuring that no one was doing anything they shouldn't. His eyes scanned the room methodically, passing over the rows of people enjoying their night out. When his gaze reached the back of the theater, it lingered on the homeless man for a moment. Something about his presence stood out. Perhaps it was the contrast between his worn-out clothing and the opulence of the theater. Or perhaps it was the way he blended into the shadows, making him appear even more out of place. The guard wasn't used to seeing people like this in his theater. In his eyes, the homeless man didn't belong there. The theater was for those who could afford to enjoy it, not for those who couldn't even keep themselves properly dressed. It wasn't that the guard disliked the man, but he didn't see the need for someone like him to be there. The rules were clear, and they were meant to be followed. The guard made his way toward the back, his heavy boots tapping against the floor with each step. The homeless man, engrossed in the movie, didn't notice the approaching figure. He was too focused on the flickering lights on the screen, trying to immerse himself in the world that was so far removed from his own. Without warning, the guard stopped beside the man's seat. The sound of his presence seemed to break the illusion of the moment for the homeless man. He looked up, startled, as the guard's shadow fell across him. The guard's voice was firm and without a trace of empathy, his tone a mixture of authority and impatience. He didn't give the man a chance to explain himself. His words were sharp and direct, demanding that the homeless man leave the theater immediately. There was no offer of understanding or room for negotiation. The rules had been broken in his mind, and now they needed to be enforced. The homeless man blinked in confusion. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't done anything wrong. He looked around, as if hoping someone would come to his defense, but the rest of the crowd remained oblivious, lost in their own worlds. He tried to speak, to explain, but his voice was shaky, unsure. He was not used to confrontation. He had become accustomed to being ignored or dismissed, but this was different. This was the harsh reality of being cast out of being reminded that he didn't belong. He opened his mouth to protest, but the guard's unyielding presence shut him down before he could get a word out. The guard stood tall, unmoving, his face unreadable. He wasn't here to listen. He was here to enforce the rules, and he did so with cold determination. The homeless man was just a distraction, a problem to be dealt with. The crowd continued to watch the film, unaware of the drama unfolding in the back row. No one else seemed to notice the homeless man being singled out. There was no empathy, no recognition of his struggle, just a simple demand for him to leave. The man's shoulders slumped in defeat. He gathered his few belongings, the plastic bag with food, his ragged coat, and slowly stood up. His legs wobbled from the long hours spent wandering the streets, and his movements were slow, hesitant. He cast one last glance at the screen, as if trying to hold on to the fleeting moment of peace that the movie had given him. But it was over now. The harsh reality of his life was creeping back, and the door of the theater was calling him to the cold streets once more. As he shuffled down the aisle, the weight of the world seemed to settle on his shoulders. He wasn't angry, just resigned. He had grown used to being treated like an outsider. The night that had started as an opportunity for escape had ended with him being cast out once again. But little did he know, someone else had been watching the entire exchange from the shadows. Someone who had witnessed his unfair treatment and was about to change the course of his night in a way he could never have imagined. The atmosphere in the theater shifted as the confrontation between the homeless man and the security guard escalated. The man, his dignity stripped away by the harsh treatment, slowly stood up. His hands trembled as he gathered his few belongings. The small plastic bag of food that had once been his meager comfort, now a symbol of his invisibility in the world. His movements were hesitant, as if the weight of the situation, the judgment of those around him, pressed down on him like an unbearable load. His head was bowed, and he tried to shrink into himself, avoiding the eyes of the other moviegoers. Yet, despite his efforts, he could feel the gaze of the audience on him, their stares heavy with curiosity and discomfort. Many of the theatergoers were trying to pretend they weren't paying attention, but the tension was palpable. Some shifted uneasily in their seats, whispering to each other, the murmur of voices barely audible over the faint sound of the film still playing. Yet, despite their discomfort, no one spoke up, no one intervened. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath, as if waiting for something to break the uneasy silence. The guard's presence was imposing, unwavering, his words sharp and final, pushing the homeless man toward the exit. The homeless man, shoulders hunched, his body tense with the weight of humiliation, shuffled down the aisle. His eyes never lifted from the floor, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. He felt as though he had become a spectacle, a distraction from the evening's entertainment, and yet, no one seemed willing to offer him any kindness. The air around him was thick with a mix of judgment and indifference. The whispers continued, but none of them reached out to him. No one tried to help. No one stood up for him. It was as if the whole theater had become a stage where he was cast in the role of an unwanted, invisible figure. The security guard remained close behind, following the man as he made his slow way to the exit. There was no sign of compassion in the guard's expression, only a cold, impersonal determination to remove the problem. The man's footsteps echoed in the silent room, each one a reminder of how far removed he was from the rest of the audience, who were lost in their own world. The door loomed ahead, its exit light casting a faint glow as if signaling his return to the cold, unwelcoming world outside. As the homeless man neared the door, the room fell eerily silent. It was as if the entire space, filled with the murmur of the crowd just moments before, now held its breath. The guard stood at the edge of the theater, watching the man leave. He felt no remorse, no hesitation. He was simply doing his job, following the rules. But for the man, the rules had become a cruel barrier, one that separated him from the dignity he desperately tried to hold on to. But then, something changed in the room. A figure, unseen by most of the audience, rose from a seat in the dark corner of the theater. It was a quiet movement, unnoticed by the others who were still focused on the scene unfolding before them. The figure stepped forward, his movements purposeful, his gaze fixed on the exchange between the homeless man and the guard. This person, different from the others in the theater, seemed to observe not just the actions, but the meaning behind them. It was Keanu Reeves. Keanu had been sitting quietly nearby, blending into the shadows, his eyes fixed on the screen just moments earlier. But now, as the scene before him unfolded with such blatant injustice, he couldn't sit idly by. He stood up, moving slowly but deliberately toward the front of the theater. His presence, though unassuming, was instantly felt by anyone nearby. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene, but there was something in the way he moved that signaled a shift, a moment of decision. As the homeless man reached the door, ready to leave, Keanu's calm demeanor seemed to contrast sharply with the harshness of the guard's actions. He approached the security guard and, without a word, caught his attention. The guard, noticing the actor's presence, seemed momentarily caught off guard. But Keanu wasn't interested in creating a spectacle. He wasn't there to draw attention to himself, but to right what he saw as an injustice. The room, still tense, seemed to collectively hold its breath, awaiting the next move. Keanu looked briefly at the homeless man, who was frozen in place, his eyes now lifted in disbelief at the unexpected intervention. Keanu's gaze was calm, understanding. His decision was made, and in that moment, the entire theater seemed to pause, waiting for the ripple of change to move through the air. In the midst of the heavy silence, the man's steps slowed. The guard, though still standing his ground, had a moment of doubt. This moment, seemingly small in the grand scheme of things, was shifting the course of the evening. The tension, which had filled the room just moments before, was now being replaced by something else, something unspoken but palpable. As Keanu's quiet intervention continued, the power dynamics in the room began to shift. The guard, still unsure of what to do next, found himself momentarily out of place in the presence of the actor. The audience, too, seemed to sense this shift, the power of a single act of compassion reverberating quietly through the theater. What would happen next was unclear, but it was obvious that the evening would take an unexpected turn. The homeless man, once on the edge of being dismissed from the theater, now stood at the crossroads of an entirely new opportunity, one that could change everything. And Keanu Reeves, with his simple act of kindness, had become the catalyst for that change. Keanu Reeves stood up from his seat with a calm and deliberate movement, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The low hum of the movie seemed to fade as he walked through the rows of seats, each step measured and purposeful. His presence was commanding, but not in an aggressive way. There was something inherently calm and powerful about the way he moved, like someone who knew exactly what they wanted to do without needing to make a fuss. As he neared the front of the theater, the atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. The whispers died down, and even the restless shifting of feet seemed to stop, as if the whole room was now aware that something significant was about to happen. Keanu's gaze never wavered as he approached the security guard, who was standing firmly near the door, his posture rigid and uncompromising. The guard looked down at him with a neutral expression, seemingly unfazed by the interruption. Keanu stopped a few feet away, his voice steady and calm as he asked what was going on. The security guard, still holding his ground, turned slightly to face him. In a tone that was matter-of-fact, he began to explain the situation. He had seen the homeless man in the theater, noticed his unkempt appearance, and without much thought, decided to eject him. The guard spoke as if it was all routine, without any sense of guilt or empathy for the man he had asked to leave. Keanu listened intently, his expression thoughtful but composed. He didn't interrupt the guard, but there was something in the way he held himself that made it clear he wasn't just going to let this go. The room had grown quiet, the sounds of the film no longer in the background, as everyone seemed to watch this unusual moment unfold. Keanu nodded as the guard finished speaking, absorbing the words, but his eyes, always calm, seemed to convey that this wasn't just about the rules for him. It was about fairness, dignity, and what was right. Without saying another word to the guard, Keanu turned and made his way towards the homeless man. He was still standing near the exit, unsure of what to do, looking both vulnerable and resolute, as if he had already accepted that he wasn't welcome. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes were cast down in shame, trying to avoid the gazes of those around him. But as Keanu approached, something in the man shifted. It was the quiet strength of Keanu's presence that seemed to break through the tension in the room. Keanu moved toward him and gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The touch was light but firm, a sign of understanding and solidarity. The homeless man looked up, startled by the unexpected contact. There was hesitation in his eyes, as if unsure whether this was just another moment of kindness that would soon turn into rejection. But the calmness in Keanu's demeanor, the unspoken reassurance in his gaze, began to calm the man. Keanu's actions were not of a celebrity intervening for the sake of attention, but of someone recognizing the injustice of the situation and wanting to set things right. Without words, Keanu invited the man to sit back down. The simple gesture was powerful. The homeless man, still processing what was happening, slowly lowered himself back into his seat. The tension in his body, the tightness in his shoulders began to ease, and for the first time since entering the theater, he felt a flicker of relief. Keanu turned to the security guard, who was still standing with a confused and slightly defiant look. With a subtle gesture of his hand, Keanu indicated for the guard to step back. There was no anger, no rush, just a quiet command that was impossible to ignore. The guard looked at Keanu, the man who was no longer just an actor, but a figure of quiet authority in this moment. Keanu's gaze was unwavering, and it was clear that he wasn't asking for permission. He was making a statement. Keanu was taking responsibility for the man. He wasn't just letting the homeless man stay. He was vouching for him. The guard, though initially resistant, seemed to falter as he met Keanu's gaze. He wasn't used to someone so calm, so sure, taking control of the situation like this. Keanu's unassuming nature, his lack of ego, made the guard reconsider his position. He had no answer, no retort to the quiet strength that stood before him. Slowly, reluctantly, the security guard stepped back, acknowledging Keanu's authority in this space. There was no confrontation, no shouting, just a moment of understanding that passed between them. The guard turned, gave one last glance at the homeless man, and slowly walked away, his role in the situation now finished. The theater, once thick with tension and whispers, now felt lighter. The people who had been watching the altercation, unsure of how to react, slowly began to breathe again. The uncomfortable atmosphere dissipated, leaving only the quiet rustle of popcorn and the distant sounds of the movie. Keanu, standing next to the homeless man, gave him a reassuring smile. But it was more than just a smile. It was a moment of human connection that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. For the first time that evening, the homeless man felt as if he mattered. He had been given a second chance, not just by Keanu, but by the very nature of the act. One simple gesture that had turned an unbearable moment into something that gave him dignity, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Keanu, without fanfare, had reminded him that everyone deserved respect, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. As the evening continued, the tension in the air finally began to settle. The movie, which had been a background to the chaos, now played on in its full glory, but for some, the real story was unfolding right there in the seats of the theater, an unexpected act of kindness that would resonate long after the credits rolled. Keanu had done more than just intervene in a situation. He had created a moment that reminded everyone in that room of the power of simple human decency. Keanu Reeves stood beside the homeless man, his calm demeanor steady as he looked around the theater. The room had quieted after the brief exchange, the energy now hanging between confusion and curiosity. The audience, still unsure of what had just happened, began to whisper among themselves, glancing at Keanu, then at the homeless man, and back at Keanu again. They watched, uncertain of what was about to unfold. Keanu's actions, though simple, had already shifted the mood in the room. It wasn't just about the homeless man anymore. It was about something bigger, something that resonated with everyone present. Keanu turned his attention back to the ticket counter, where the cashier was still standing, unsure of how to proceed after witnessing the confrontation with the guard. With a quiet but direct movement, Keanu approached the counter, his steps measured and confident. The room seemed to hold its breath, all eyes on him. He spoke softly to the cashier, his words simple but decisive. Without waiting for a response, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He asked the cashier to close the theater for the night, to reserve the space for the two of them. He paid for every single ticket, ensuring that the theater was now theirs for the remainder of the screening. The cashier, still processing the unusual turn of events, hesitated for a moment before nodding. It wasn't every day that someone paid for an entire theater, let alone someone as famous as Keanu Reeves. The crowd watched in stunned silence, the weight of the gesture slowly sinking in. The whispers became louder, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from discomfort to something closer to admiration. Some were unsure if they should applaud or remain silent, but all of them recognized that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The man who had been cast aside, ignored by so many, now had a space to himself, and it was all thanks to someone who, by all appearances, had no obligation to help him at all. Keanu, unaffected by the stares of the audience, turned back to the homeless man. His eyes met the man's, and in that silent exchange, a world of understanding passed between them. Without a word, Keanu extended his hand toward the seat next to him in the front row. It was an invitation not just to sit, but to join him in the experience, to share in the rare privilege of watching the film in this intimate setting. The homeless man, still trying to process the kindness that had been shown to him, looked at Keanu in disbelief. His heart raced, and his mind struggled to accept the reality of the moment. He had never been offered such a chance before, not by anyone. Not only had he been allowed to stay in the theater, but now he was being invited to sit in the front row to experience this evening as if he truly belonged. For a moment, the man hesitated. He looked at the empty seats in the front, then at the crowd behind him. It was too much to believe, too much to take in. This wasn't supposed to be his world. People like him didn't get these kind of chances. He had spent so many years drifting through life, barely holding on, that this kind of generosity felt almost foreign. But as he stood there, taking in the scene, something inside him clicked. The quiet reassurance in Keanu's eyes, the calmness of his gestures, made him realize that this wasn't a fluke, wasn't some publicity stunt. It was simply kindness. And kindness, he realized, was something he could accept. Slowly, carefully, the homeless man made his way to the front row, his movements stiff at first, as if unsure of his place. He could feel the eyes of the other moviegoers on him, but this time, it was different. No one was judging him. Instead, they watched as he took a seat next to Keanu, his body still tense, but a small spark of relief beginning to light up his face. He wasn't sure why Keanu had done this, why he had chosen him, but in that moment, the world felt just a little bit kinder, a little less harsh. The lights of the theater seemed warmer, the air less cold. As he settled into the seat beside Keanu, the man couldn't help but glance around the theater again. The other patrons were still watching, still processing the unexpected turn of events. It was hard for him to shake the feeling that he didn't belong, that this was all some kind of mistake. But Keanu, sitting beside him, remained silent, not pushing him to talk, not expecting anything in return. The two of them sat there, side by side, as the film continued to play on the screen before them. The world outside seemed a million miles away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the homeless man felt like he had a place in it. He wasn't invisible here, not anymore. The lights on the screen flickered, the sound of the film flowing over him like a comforting wave, and for the next couple of hours, he was just another person watching the movie. The chaos of his life, the constant struggle, was momentarily forgotten. All that mattered was the simplicity of this moment, the generosity of a stranger who had given him something far more valuable than money or food. He had been given dignity, respect, and the chance to be seen. As the movie went on, the homeless man slowly relaxed, his body shifting into the seat, his mind gradually shedding the anxiety that had been clinging to him. Keanu, sitting beside him, remained quietly immersed in the film, seemingly unaffected by the weight of the attention that had turned towards him. He didn't seek applause or admiration. He was simply there, in the moment, extending a kindness that was as much for himself as it was for the man sitting beside him. In the midst of a world that often felt divided and cold, Keanu had reminded both the homeless man and everyone watching that there was always room for compassion, always room for a simple gesture that could change someone's life. The rest of the evening unfolded in a quiet, peaceful way. The whispers that had filled the air earlier were now replaced with a soft hum of acceptance. Keanu and the homeless man sat together, sharing in an experience that transcended the divide between them. It wasn't just a movie they were watching, it was the beginning of something much more profound, something that no one in that theater would forget. The movie continued to unfold on the screen, but now the atmosphere in the theater had shifted. The tension that had permeated the air just moments ago, the unease and discomfort, had faded into a rare sense of calm. It was as if the events of the night had set the stage for something more meaningful, something that transcended the movie itself. The sound of the film's soundtrack filled the room, but it wasn't the only thing that resonated in the space anymore. There was an unspoken understanding between Keanu and the homeless man, a quiet connection that seemed to deepen with each passing minute. Keanu sat beside him, his eyes occasionally drifting back to the screen, but more often than not, his gaze turned toward the homeless man. He wasn't just watching the film, he was sharing it. His words were soft, almost as if he didn't want to break the serenity of the moment. Keanu would occasionally make a comment about the scene or share his thoughts on a character, but his remarks weren't meant to dominate the conversation. They were simply an invitation to connect, to share in the experience together. The homeless man, still processing everything that had happened, nodded slightly in response, his eyes still fixed on the screen. He hadn't been to a movie in years, and the familiarity of the experience was both comforting and overwhelming. He felt like an ordinary person again, just another moviegoer. The quiet between them felt warm, intimate even. No longer a spectacle, no longer an outsider. The homeless man found himself wrapped in the ordinary, everyday joy of watching a film. He didn't feel the weight of his past, the burden of his circumstances, or the judgment of those around him. In that moment, he was simply present, enjoying a simple pleasure that, just hours earlier, seemed impossible. Keanu's presence beside him didn't make him feel small. Instead, it gave him the sense of being seen, of being worthy of the same enjoyment as anyone else in that theater. Some of the other moviegoers began to notice the pair sitting in the front row. Their initial curiosity about the situation had faded, replaced by something more thoughtful. They realized that Keanu, who had just moments before been a celebrity, wasn't seeking attention. He wasn't performing for the audience. He wasn't playing the role of the famous actor. He was just a man, sitting beside another man, sharing a quiet moment of normalcy. It wasn't about the fame or the recognition. It was about the act itself, showing kindness, offering comfort, and bridging the divide that so often separates people in society. For those who had been observing, it was a revelation. Keanu was more than just the actor they admired on screen. He was embodying the values they so often long to see in the world: humility, generosity, and the quiet strength to do what was right without fanfare. The homeless man, though still processing the surreal nature of the evening, began to relax. His posture softened, his shoulders that had been tense with anxiety slowly unwound. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that theater, barely holding on to his dignity. The kindness he had experienced was like a balm, easing the rough edges of his life. It wasn't just that Keanu had bought him a ticket or shared the space with him. It was that Keanu had seen him as a person, not as someone to be discarded or ignored. In a world where the homeless were often invisible, Keanu had made him visible, if only for this brief moment. For those in the audience who had been watching from afar, the realization came slowly but surely. They began to notice the way Keanu interacted with the homeless man, not with pity, not with condescension, but with respect. He wasn't treating the man like a charity case. He was treating him like a fellow human being worthy of kindness and dignity. There was no pretension in his actions, no sense of superiority. He wasn't there to draw attention to himself, to be praised for his generosity. He simply acted because it felt right. The atmosphere in the theater had completely transformed. The movie, which had once been the center of attention, now seemed almost secondary to the quiet drama unfolding in the front row. People shifted in their seats, some more relaxed, others still unsure of what they had witnessed, but all silently acknowledging that something profound had taken place. The movie was still playing, but it no longer held the same weight. It was as if the real story had already been told, in the way Keanu had acted, in the way the homeless man had been treated, in the way the audience had responded, not with applause, but with a shift in perception. They had all become witnesses to a moment of genuine human connection, and in doing so, they had been subtly changed. The homeless man, now sitting more comfortably, found himself lost in the film, his earlier discomfort replaced by a sense of belonging. For the first time that evening, he wasn't worried about being an outsider, about being different from the others in the theater. He was just another person watching a movie, sharing a moment with someone who cared, someone who had made him feel seen in a way that he hadn't in years. Keanu, without making a big gesture, continued to watch the film, his attention occasionally flicking toward the man beside him. There was no need for words anymore. The connection had been made, and it was stronger than any conversation could have conveyed. The movie, once a mere distraction from the world, had now become a part of a larger, more meaningful experience. It wasn't just the story on the screen that mattered. It was the story unfolding between the two of them, in that quiet theater, in that fleeting moment where kindness, humanity, and respect transcended everything else. As the film played on, the audience began to settle into a new understanding of the night. The tension that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by a feeling of peace, a quiet recognition of the power of simple actions. Keanu had done something that few would have done, and in doing so, he had not only changed the life of the homeless man beside him, but had also left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed the act. It was a reminder that heroism wasn't always about grand gestures or public recognition. Sometimes, it was simply about choosing kindness in the most unexpected of moments. As the final credits of the film rolled across the screen, the theater, which had once been filled with whispers and tension, now seemed to be soaked in an unusual silence. The lights slowly came up, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound that lingered in the room. The homeless man, still seated in the front row, sat for a moment longer, absorbing the feeling of being part of something. The film had ended, but the emotions it stirred in him, combined with the quiet generosity he had received, would stay with him long after the final frame faded. He looked over at Keanu, who was now standing, his presence still commanding but gentle. Keanu, with his characteristic calm, waited for the homeless man to gather his things. The air in the theater had shifted entirely, and the sense of calm between them was palpable. They had both shared something during the evening, not just the film, but a connection that transcended the usual barriers that separated people. The homeless man stood slowly, his movements more confident now than when he had first walked into the theater hours ago. He turned to Keanu, his voice quiet but full of gratitude, and thanked him. It was a simple word, but it carried more weight than the man could express. He had never expected this kind of kindness, never imagined that someone like Keanu, someone so distant from his world, would reach out in such a way. Yet here he was, standing in the theater, a place he never thought he would belong, having experienced something more profound than he could articulate. Keanu nodded, his expression as calm and serene as ever. He didn't say much in response, but his actions spoke louder than any words could. He understood the significance of what had transpired. The evening, for both of them, was not just about the film or the charity event. It was about something deeper. Keanu realized that, for him, this moment had brought a new understanding of the power of small, sincere actions. The kind of kindness that didn't seek recognition, but made an impact nonetheless. It was a reminder that in a world often obsessed with success and visibility, simple gestures of humanity, could create ripples that lasted much longer than any fame or fortune. Together, they walked out of the theater, the soft click of the door closing behind them marking the end of this unexpected chapter. The night outside was cool, the city streets lit by the soft glow of street lamps. The homeless man, still processing the events, felt a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in a long time. The darkness of the street, which had always represented his isolation, no longer seemed so daunting. It felt like an open road, filled with possibility. As they walked side by side, Keanu didn't rush, didn't push the man to talk or explain his feelings. They simply walked in silence, the city's hum surrounding them, each lost in their thoughts. For the homeless man, this night had been a turning point, not just because of the kindness he had received, but because of the way he had been treated as an equal. For Keanu, it was a quiet reminder that the small acts of kindness, the ones that often go unnoticed, are the ones that matter most. The world, in all its chaos and distractions, often overlooks the simple things, but it's those very things that have the power to change lives. As they reached the end of the block, Keanu turned to the man and gave him one last glance. There was no need for words, no need for a grand farewell. They both knew that this moment would stay with them forever. For the homeless man, it would be a reminder that kindness still existed in the world, even in the most unexpected places. For Keanu, it would serve as a reminder of the profound impact that one small act of humanity can have. The two men parted ways at the corner, their paths diverging into the quiet streets of the city. Keanu, ever humble, returned to his own life, while the homeless man, with a newfound sense of dignity, walked into the night, his heart a little lighter, his mind full of possibilities he hadn't considered before. The city continued its restless rhythm, but for the two of them, something had shifted. The kindness of a stranger had sparked a change that would echo long after the night had passed. Behind them, the theater doors remained closed, the memory of what had transpired within them slowly fading. But the impact of that moment, of one man's quiet compassion, left an indelible mark on every person who had witnessed it. The people in the theater, the ones who had been part of this quiet revolution, would carry that memory with them, whether they realized it or not. It was a lesson they wouldn't forget, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can leave a lasting impression. And as the homeless man disappeared into the night, his figure slowly blending into the shadows of the city, the world seemed just a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder than before.